Okay, everyone, we'll get started. Welcome to this webinar 2.0, which is following up our open letter where we called upon our leaders for a sustainable economic reset. This is following the first webinar that we did, and we're going to be unpacking action. I'm Shay. I'm the founder of CaliWoods, and we're a social enterprise that focuses on reducing waste and then inspiring positive change in New Zealand to help get us on track to a more sustainable future. I'm joined today by the 5 experts who co-wrote the open letter. So Paul Callister, Hannah Blumhart, David Tong, Melanie Mark-Shadbolt, and Mike Joy. And before we go any further, I'm going to invite Mel to do a karakia for us.
Kia ora, ngā mihi Shay. Karakia te matanga. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga. Haumi e, hui e, tāu ki e.
Amazing, thanks Mel. So guys, today we have 1 hour and I'm gonna split the webinar up into sections so we really get deep into unpacking the action and the next steps for New Zealand. So we've come quite a way since we've started the open letter, which was done during level 4 lockdown in New Zealand, Covid19. And yeah, the sections today, we're kind of go topic 1 is the context and the current state, just to give everybody some sort of relevance. Then we're going to dive deep in topic 2 into unpacking the action. And then topic 3 at the end is a quick fire round of tips that the experts are going to leave everybody with. So the open letter, a bit of a recap. We put together the open letter and it had 5 main sections. We covered Mataranga Māori, renewable energy, agriculture, transport, and then waste and recycling. This was then submitted to MPs, ministers, and local government just before we went into level 2 and just before the budget was announced as well. From this, we've had a lot of press, which has been really, really awesome. So the message has definitely gotten out there. We had nearly 3,000 individual Kiwis sign the petition. Over 330 businesses and organisations actually commit and co-sign and put their logo on the open letter too. So that was really powerful and awesome mahi to all you guys out there who got involved in that. And awesome to see everybody showing up for this webinar as well. It's really, really cool. Thank you guys. So for me, the open letter was just the beginning. And I think it was a really great way to bring a community together, get engagement from individuals, get a bit of a buy-in from the business community and organisations in New Zealand. And it was kind of the start to contribute to this momentum of change that we know that we desperately need. And COVID-19 presented us with that unfortunate but unparalleled opportunity in our history to really start making a difference. So we now have the means and the motivation to implement change, and we're holding our leaders to account, because they have the moral and the legal obligation to us, to our planet, and to future generations to really get this right. So yeah, webinar 1.0, we shared all the ideas, we kind of went over what was in the open letter, all of the experts gave you their thoughts and their feelings around things and where they'd like to see things going. Since then, we've had the budget announced, we've had certain things in the media really blow up, we've obviously had everybody itching to return back to some sort of normality after being locked away in their houses for quite some time. So how do we take the best of lockdown? How do we take this opportunity and really push it into action? And what role do we play in this? Because we can see that government have a very strong role to play right now. But are they making the right decisions? And if they're not, how can we hold them to account? And how can we get this on the right track? So all of you guys coming together today is really, really important. And I'd just like to say thank you very much. And keep an ear out for those tips if you can. Make sure you write them down, put them down as we go. Just a little bit of admin for the webinar today. We apologise in advance if we cannot get to your questions in the chat. The panelists will do their best to answer questions that are relevant to their topic area if possible, but please understand that we only have 1 hour today and we're really trying to dive deep and go into the perspectives of the 5 experts that we have. So feel free to put your questions in there, but just understand that potentially we might not get to them in this time. Okay, so topic 1. Here we go. All right. So this is a bit of context. We're setting the scene, we're sort of talking about what our current state is, where we've kind of come in the last little bit. So my topic question to the panelists, and they have about 3 minutes to answer this each. So what have we achieved in a little bit over a month? From your guys' key areas specifically, have we seen positives and progress? Or are you concerned? Or is there a little bit of both? I'll hand it over to Hannah to go first, if you're prepared to go, Hannah.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Shay, and thanks for having me, and to all the co-panelists today. And thank you for everyone who's come. So yeah, I'm Hannah. I run the rubbish trip with my partner Liam, and I'm obsessed with zero waste. So zero waste, lockdown had some interesting implications for zero waste. It did result in all of us consuming a lot less and getting a lot more resourceful and self-reliant, as observed by the flower apocalypse. However, the recycling system did collapse, and there was a bunch of unsubstantiated fear-mongering about how packaging and disposables were necessary for hygiene. So coming out of lockdown, if I were to feel confident that we've learned some lessons and maintained progress, I'd expect to see an increase in some of the following things. I'd expect to see more ambitious plans to reduce our reliance on recycling at a personal, industry and government level, as it's obviously not the answer. I'd expect to see government policies phasing out a meaningful range of single-use items and enthusiasm to really incentivize and build systems and infrastructure based around reuse, and serious conversation about levying wasteful business models. For businesses and individuals, I'd expect to see a realization that mindless consumption is literally destroying us, and see a bit of a decrease in consumption. We'd also see a greater number of hospitality outlets ditching single-use serviceware, more individuals bringing their own cups and containers. We'd see a lift in clientele for local grocers, bakers, butchers, greengrocers, zero waste stores. And we'd see supermarkets making a real effort to push back on their suppliers to develop reusable packaging models. I'd also expect to see across the board an end to putting food scraps in the rubbish bin, and serious moves to deal with this problem with big investment in a nationwide network of decentralized community compost hubs. Is any of this happening? Well, as we've moved down alert levels, what I'm seeing is a rebound in consumption, and I'm not sure if we're remembering the resourcefulness and realizations that have come from lockdown. I will note that we have seen a fair bit more mainstream media coverage on waste issues, and this coverage seems to be much deeper and more considered than before, including Dr. Mike Joy talking about composting toilets on the project, which was highlight of my last couple of weeks. At an individual, community and small business level, the people who were already committed to zero waste and cultures of reuse seem just as committed, and if anything, even more enthusiastic. So the initial fear-mongering around waste reduction and hygiene seems not to have had much of an impact in the existing zero waste community in New Zealand. Greenpeace New Zealand's brought out a campaign calling for a ban on single-use plastic drink bottles, so there's that. We've also seen since lockdown the launch of Sustain Aotearoa, which is a new association of New Zealand independent zero waste grocers who are now working together to accelerate a less wasteful food system. And on a community level, we've seen some really awesome community-based solutions coming up after lockdown to tackle our waste issues. One example that I just love is on Waiheke Island, where the local zero waste grocer, Plastic Free Pantry, has teamed up with the local zero waste organisation, Waiheke Resources Trust, and they've set up a system of collecting used jars from the community, removing the labels, sterilising them, and then distributing them to cafes and hospitality outlets to use instead of throwaway coffee cups. They've had zillions of cafes sign up, even a petrol station, and the system's now operating at the local Saturday market, and they're avoiding hundreds of throwaway cups every week. And locals are really into it. So that's really cool. So good things have been happening in that the existing zero waste movement's really been doubling down on their activities. But in terms of new individuals and businesses thinking about waste or more ambitious zero waste policies at a local and central government level, I'm afraid I'm not really seeing that at this point. Soz, guys.
Awesome, Han. Yeah, so cool to hear of all those little individual initiatives that have happened. You know, you sort of see them pop up, and it's really cool to see. But yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one. Nothing that's like absolutely major that's kind of come up and said, oh wow, our whole recycling system collapsed, and yet we're still not doing anything about it. So yeah, I guess we'll unpack that a little further when we go into topic 2. David, do you want to carry on from Hannah?
Sure. I feel like I'm laying a similar story. We've seen some good steps forward, some small changes, but nothing hugely transformative from our government. So internationally, there's been a lot happening. Ireland is on the verge of banning oil and gas exploration and new oil and gas production. So going beyond what New Zealand's done and banning not just offshore, but onshore too. They're also on the verge of banning the importation of fracked gas, which will have big impact, or which would, if more countries did that, that would have impacts for some frontline, helping some frontline communities and Indigenous communities in the United States in particular. Some countries have taken initiative to couple bailouts for airlines with really strong requirements or proposed requirements around decarbonisation, where New Zealand has just bailed out Air New Zealand, and Air New Zealand still made staff redundant. But in New Zealand, well, we haven't seen a major move from government to seize this as a chance to transform our energy system. We have seen nothing too bad, or 2 of the existing shovel-ready projects on the list are problematic. And that's a lot better than we were. But ultimately, in terms of getting to 100% renewable electricity, let alone 100% renewable energy, because of course electricity is around 1/3 of New Zealand's energy production and use, we are not seeing a transformative action from this government. It's also notable that in the budget, while there was a big push for new conservation jobs, none of that funding is for renewable energy. None of that funding is for climate action. It's for biodiversity conservation, which is important, but it's no substitute for climate action. We need both.
Thanks, David, and really good to hear your perspective on that. Paul, would you like to go next and give us a little lowdown about everything from your perspective and the transport section?
Thanks for the invitation to come back. I was really positive during level 4. I know people were doing it really tough in New Zealand, losing jobs, and people were losing their lives around the world. But in terms of transport, we actually saw a transformation. We saw people stopping driving cars. We saw the planes disappeared from the skies. We saw a dramatic change, and we saw just locally, people were cycling, they were walking on the streets, they took over the roads. And so I thought, oh yes, you know, they're going to remember this. There's going to be a reset when we get to the end of it. And we had a lot of promises, even from local authorities. Auckland was going to put in a lot of cycleways for social distancing. Wellington was going to do it. There were all sorts of places that were going to do these things. And when I went and got some new tyres after lockdown, I talked to the bike shop owner, and he said he's sold more bikes in the last month than he's sold in the whole of the last year. So people were buying the bikes. So it looked really positive. But today I was back out on my bike, and I put on my flashing lights, and I put on my high-vis jacket, and I saw the 4-wheel drive, you know, roaring past, and I realised we've got a long way to go on the cycleways issue. So, yeah, the transformation that was going to happen through local authorities and government doesn't seem to have happened. The other thing that I saw is really positive, and we're using Zoom, of course, now, is that so many organisations use Zoom, and it was transformational. I attended a Zoom meeting where 300 older people were part of that. And when I'd been to previous meetings of that organisation, maybe 20 would turn out on a cold winter's night at 5:30. And so people who had caring responsibilities, people who were coming from other countries joined those things. But again, I've seen most of the organisations I'm involved in have ditched Zoom almost straight away to go back to face-to-face meetings. So I think we could really see that transformation. They may have to be mixed Zoom and face-to-face meetings. And David talked about the airline industry. I mean, I've been really disappointed about New Zealand's response with the airline industry. Sure, you know, we're not flying internationally, so there's a huge bit of carbon that's disappeared there. But we got 3,000 signatures, 3,000 plus on our petition. Well, on the same platform, Sounds Air got 40,000 signatures for government support, and government has now supported Sounds Air with the argument that it needs to keep flying to the regions. Well, all those regions have links through other means. So we're not seeing that transformation in transport that we wanted to see. I think people have got the reset idea in their mind still, and I think people will push for it, but boy, do we have to push hard, because the business of usual people are pushing even harder.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, really looking forward to diving a bit deeper into some of those solutions with you in a sec. That'll be really, really interesting. Cool, over to Mel. Mel wrote our Mātauranga Māori section, and really can't wait to hear what you have to say, Mel.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, nei mai haere mai ki te zui nei. Ngā mihi Shay for the invitation, ko Melanie Mark-Shadbolt tukunga, he uri au o Ngāti Porou rātou ko Ngāti Kahanunu ki Wairarapa ko Te Arawa ko Te Atiawa. So I'm a descendant of those tribes, and I wear many hats, including that of a ministry official at Ministry for the Environment, but equally, and if not more important, is the one I wear for my community as the CEO of Te Tira Whakamātaki, a Māori environmental not-for-profit. Like our other panelists have said, completely support what Paul was just saying. Some things were transformational, i.e. the way we worked via Zoom, the way we reprioritised and spent time with our whānau, the way we embraced learning and re-engaged with the wider world via webinars and picking up hobbies. We saw an increase in the recognition of the importance of local solutions and local responses for Māori that manifested in the love-hate that the public had for our roadblocks. But for us, it was an empowerment of Māori to assert their mana motuhaki and to protect their communities. We saw an acknowledgement that Māori were most likely to be disproportionately impacted, and therefore their voices needed to be heard and funding needed to be found to support Māori to participate in the COVID response. We saw an acknowledgement that Māori values are important and that they need to be included in the restart of our economy and in our response. We all learnt the word rahui, and we started to use te reo more predominantly in our day-to-day vocab when we talked about COVID. We saw a testing of the Māori Crown partnership and what a treaty partnership looks like, especially as the government rolled out investments and projects that directly impacted treaty settlements and Māori communities. And I think we saw a new appreciation of nature and of the outdoors, and an increased understanding of the interconnections between human and environmental well-being. We all felt better after a walk around the block or a walk through the park. We've also seen that the government can move quickly if it wants to, and it can find money, and it can spend money, and it can pass legislation. So if we learnt all of those things and we learnt about inequities and interconnections, then I would have expected to have seen an inclusion of Māori knowledge in the solutions, a consideration and response to Māori rights and interests in investment and policy, and a conversation about how we address intergenerational inequities, especially in the climate that we have now around Black Lives Matter. I would have expected to see all of those things, and yet I have seen none, or very minimal. So I think we learnt lots, but as the other panelists have said, we quickly forgot and we went back to some of our business as usual habits. And I think in some ways, in the space where Māori operate, we've actually seen a wee bit of a reverse to even worse behaviours, where in the fight to acquire funding and to acquire a space and a place in the COVID response, some behaviours have emerged that are to exclude, and predominantly in my space to exclude Māori voices and Māori knowledge. So I saw amazing things during lockdown and am now seeing some bad behaviours emerge that I personally am not a fan of. Kia ora.
Awesome, thanks for that, Mel. And again, looking forward to unpacking that further. And last but not least, we have Mike Joy. And I'll leave that over to you, Mike, to do a bit of an intro and give us your always interesting thoughts.
Great, thanks, Jay, and thanks for everybody who's listening or watching. I mean, I'm a researcher at the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies at Victoria University in Wellington. I'm a freshwater ecologist, environmental scientist, and an activist. Yeah, I mean, like my other panelists, I've seen good and bad over the time. I've been really heartened to see some work coming from NGOs like Greenpeace around highlighting the impacts of intensive agriculture and highlighting that crazy situation where we make milk out of fossil fuels with nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, and great that they're doing that and trying to get that word out. Great to see Pure Advantage and their big series I hope people have seen on regenerative agriculture that they've been doing lately. So some great, you know, typical, it's coming from the ground up, not from government down. Really hard to get any movement from Ministry of Primary Industries on this. Really, they are caught up in the industrial agriculture system, and we probably need a clean out to get them to take any notice. That's kind of the good stuff that I've seen. On what I've seen from government over that sort of the last month is just, you know, in the budget, this money for cleaning up. I get really frustrated about spending money on cleaning up waterways when all we have to do is stop polluting them. You know, we can plant trees and things, sure, that's great, but we're just treating symptoms. We're driving ambulances to the bottom of the cliff, and we're not sorting out the fence at the top. And that goes for just about everything we're talking about, I think. So we really need to change that. Really depressed with some of the shockingly bad environmental decisions coming from this coalition government. And it's all very well, they seem to be really happy to blame New Zealand first, or most New Zealanders seem to be, but I'm starting to wonder about that. So we've seen decisions on mining in Waihi, that where it's taken off, Eugenie Sage and Ministers Parker and Robertson both pushing that development to happen there, an increase in the tailings dam area there, which is a really, really dumb thing to do and have shocking environmental consequences for us at some stage. Just today, announcement, or in the last few days, about no protection for subantarctic fishing protections down there. We saw the changes in the freshwater policy, national policy statement for freshwater, where they backed down on the scientific advice. Really frustrating after spending a couple of years being asked to give advice to the government, being part of a team, working a lot in my own time, and a group of us doing it unpaid, to then have our advice ignored by the government. And the really frustrating part of that was to hear Ministers Shaw and others say, well, we can't do anything about it because there's no agreement from, you know, there's not total consensus from the scientists. Well, if they applied that same logic to climate change, then, you know, why are we doing anything about climate change? There's not consensus there, but we know. And so, yeah, quite frustrating there. And Minister Robertson calling for people to get back to work in Auckland and Wellington because the cafes are not doing well. I mean, that's just incredible. It suggests to me they just don't get it, or they're under a lot of pressure there. So, yep, some good stuff happening, and I think typical, it's coming from the bottom up, and from the top down, we're getting some really bad decisions.
Cool, guys. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people in the sustainability space will be feeling the same, you know, super heartened by all the individual actions and a lot of the things that we're coming across on social media. A lot of the changes, people just getting more thrifty and crafty and, you know, doing things themselves. But really what we're facing here is a lot of behavior change and a lot of systemic change too. Both of which are pretty big topics to kind of dive into, but that's what we're here for, you know, like we're all very passionate and we can all see the right way forward, and we all know that it's extremely important for our survival on this planet, not to mention all of the other species that live here too. So that brings us into our next topic. So all of that stuff can feel pretty heavy, but there is a lot of positive things going on, and there are a lot of people out there that really, really care and really give a shit and are putting their own time into making things happen. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to unpack some action. So all of those topics that we just heard about and the current state and the context, those were there for you guys to kind of get a grasp on where the panelists will come from next as they start to unpack the action and the next steps for New Zealand. Within this, they'll really try to give some specific tips where applicable. So that will either be on the individual level, or if you're in business or work for a business and can create change in that organization, there will try to be some specific tips in there for you as well. Yeah, and they've roughly got about 4 minutes. Okay, so no easy task, but we're here for a challenge. So we're going to actually start with Mike, who just gave us his overview there. I really liked, Mike, when you were saying, you know, hey, we've got a bathtub that's overflowing, and we've got the plug in there, and we're not addressing pulling the plug out. We're actually, we've got to turn off the tap. We have to turn off the tap, and we have to go to the actual source and root cause of these issues and really look deep into them. So yeah, the topic 2 question is, what specific action would you like to see right now? How can we get there? So splitting those answers into two different topics, the action and then the how. Any specific sort of suggestions that you have, and Mike, yeah, how do you get those? How do you get the government to listen to that expert opinion? I'd love to have some insight on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you get the government. They ask for advice, and we've seen series of working groups, and they a tax working group, a welfare working group, a freshwater science working group, and then they ignore everything. So we just got to watch out for that. It's a good way of kind of passing the buck and then not doing anything. So we need to call them to account on that. And I think so, you know, for an individual, the best thing we can do is to do something at the election that's coming up soon, to make sure that we don't have that, the kind of decisions that we're getting at the moment. We need to think about strategically about that. And I think so. You know, from central government, we need to tell our government to get away from this GDP obsession that they. You know, I think we all thought during lockdown that we all realised that there are far more important things than GDP. We got it, and I think that we thought, well, I did, that the government might get it, that we're not really that interested in that there are far more important things for us, and so we need to make sure that we stop subsidising harmful practices like subsidising businesses, intensive farming, and the use of non-renewable resources, and we've subsidised them by allowing them to pollute our freshwaters. Lots of call from the farming industry to back off on things that will protect our waterways. And I think it's important for people to think, when you hear farming or industry lobby groups say, oh, we can't do that because it's going to cost $19 zillion if we do that, well, then you immediately have to think, well, if it's going to cost you $19 billion to protect our waterways, then we are subsidizing you to the tune of that amount, allowing you to do that. So no, that's not acceptable. That's not an acceptable excuse. You have to change what you're doing, because we can't keep doing that. We could do something immediately, and I mean, these shovel-ready projects, I can't see that they've picked up on the need to fix our water infrastructure as a shovel-ready project that all around New Zealand we've got failed freshwater infrastructure, stormwater, wastewater, all of those things that need to be fixed. They're not sexy, they don't get you votes at the local council, but they need to be done, and the government could spend money there. I know Melanie's probably gonna say this, but there's so much Indigenous knowledge that the government is not using and that organisations are not using. There's so much to be learned here that we need to pick up on, and so I want to see that as a solution in everything we do across the whole lot. And I think that for individuals, we have to be louder. We have to protest more. We need to speak up. I think that, you know, the realization that we need to think local, do everything local. Some great examples from Hana about what's happening in Waiheke Island, and we see in Paikakariki where Paul and I live, the opportunity for local communities to be really part of a much more sustainable and resilient future. So lots of opportunities for us there, but we really need to put pressure on the government to do what we want them to do, and so we need to be noisier to do that. Thanks.
Amazing, Mike. Yeah, some really good suggestions in there. It's super important to have those actions to really hold on to and actually, you know, act yourself. A lot of power in individual action, which leads to collective reaction. So on that note, Hannah, you talked about a lot of local initiatives when you gave us a little update before. So as we move into topic 2 and your unpacking action, I'd love to invite you to sort of take that and potentially give us some ideas on how that can be scaled, and of course giving individuals and businesses some sort of ideas when it comes to waste and recycling, which is your subject area.
Yes, sure, thank you. Well, one of the positives about the fact that there's so much rubbish everywhere is that honestly there's so many things that we can do, like just take your pick. So I'm going to talk about individual, business, local, central government actions, but to start with, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'll repeat as I always do, that if any of us are going to go to the effort of taking specific actions to reduce waste and we actually want to have an impact and save money, we should focus our energy on the top of the waste hierarchy, because that's what gets you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of reducing your waste footprint and also greenhouse gas emissions. So that means in practice, focusing on preventing and reducing waste in the first place and reusing resources rather than fixating on recycling. So to start with individuals, some community and local suggestions. If you aren't already, please take action to compost, worm farm or bokashi bin your organic waste. This is the single biggest thing any human being can do to reduce their total waste to landfill, and it has a climate change impact. If you can't do it yourself, look for community-based solutions. You could also take on a plastic-free July pledge this year. It's just around the corner. Remembering though that plastic is not our only waste problem, so try to replace plastics with reusables rather than just buying things in disposable glass and paper. We can also try to put our money where our mouth is and choose to shop at local businesses who are providing zero waste consumption solutions. And this will also help us to stimulate our local economies and provide support for people, you know, the little guys that are trying. So check out the Rubbish Trip Regional Zero Waste Shopping Guides that cover the whole of New Zealand to find options near you. We can also make more of a conscious effort to reduce our consumption of gadgets, widgets, clothes, appliances, electronics, to get broken things repaired and to buy things secondhand if we really need them. And so to achieve these goals, you can support your local resource recovery centres, community groups doing things like repair cafes and op shops. I also really tautoko Mike's comment that we need as individuals and communities to be louder and more vocal. Keep putting pressure on government to take the actions that I'll outline for them shortly, because they face constant pushback from lobbyists and risk aversion within the Ministry for the Environment. Also, sign petitions like the Greenpeace petition to ban plastic drink bottles and the Takeaway Throwaways petition to ban single-use serviceware and replace these things with reusable alternatives. Okay, for businesses, ask yourselves, how can you further reduce your dependence on single-use items and foster reuse systems, both in terms of what you pass on to consumers, but also doing work to reduce your waste behind the scenes and up your supply chain. So you can do this in exactly the same way an individual would, which is to literally analyze every every item you put in the bin, in the recycling bin, and ask yourself, where has this come from? Why do I have it? Who's passing this on to me? How can I talk to them about alternatives? Can I get this product from somewhere else in another way? And so important is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. How can you work with other businesses like yours to maximize your impact? For example, look at what the zero waste grocers are doing with their Sustain Aotearoa model. If you're in hospo, the time has come for two things. One, composting, worm farming, or bokashi binning your food scraps. Two, shifting away from single-use serviceware and using reusables. Honestly, if as a society we do not have the imagination and skill to give up disposable serviceware, frankly, we have no hope of preventing catastrophic climate change because there are far more difficult issues to tackle. So let's just sort out that canary in the coal mine. If you need help, please contact Takeaway Throwaways or New Zealand's Use Your Own Cafe Guide. And again, collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Work with other outlets together to set up a shared composting hub, or ditch throwaways together in order to reduce the risk to each other. So a number of cafes in a suburb can all agree at the same time to stop giving out throwaway cups, and then you don't lose out to each other. And finally, local and central government. Let's draw a line in the sand. No more organic waste, paper and cardboard to landfill. We just cannot afford to keep doing this for the methane emissions, but also for the loss of this resource that we need to regenerate our soil and sequester carbon. So we need scaled out community solutions. So specifically, look at the vision of the Urban Farmers Alliance, which is setting up a nationwide network of decentralized community compost hubs that are connected to urban farms. Councils, just contract this as part of your waste and recycling services. We need to funnel money into this rather than anaerobic digestion. Central government, redirect policy, including investments and product stewardship schemes towards waste prevention and reduction and boosting reuse, rather than recycling and big techno fixes like anaerobic digestion and turning plastic into roads and fence posts. Also, we have to increase our landfill levy and expand it to all landfills. At the moment, our landfill levy is $10 per tonne, and it only covers 11% of New Zealand's landfills, which is 30% of New Zealand's total waste to landfill. You have to price the linear economy if you want to move towards a circular economy. So Cabinet's going to be considering this soon. Please, it's controversial. Lots of people get upset about it. As the public, we need to get behind this and support this. And finally, ethical procurement. 50% of New Zealand's waste to landfill is construction and demolition waste. The government must ensure that its shovel-ready infrastructure projects comply with existing sustainability standards to avoid this level of waste. And in the medium term, we need all construction and demolition projects to comply with those standards. So those are a few things that can be done.
Amazing, Han. So in the chat there, guys, I've put in all of the links. So there's a few direct actions that you can all take really, really easily straight after this webinar. So make sure you click on some of those before the chat disappears and the webinar ends. Thank you so much, Han. That was really awesome. Just some awesome tasks that we can all sink our teeth into. Next up, we'll hear from Paul, and he's going to be unpacking the action around transport. So everything that he spoke about with New Zealand and New Zealanders loving to cycle during lockdown, we'll hear a little bit more about how that really looks like in practice.
So one of the websites that I think people should follow if they're interested in transport is the Greater Auckland blog site. Auckland really is going to be a key place in reducing emissions simply because it's the largest city. And the Greater Auckland website has a lot of interesting discussion, not only about transport, but about housing and such like. So a lot of the things I think about are on that website. In the last webinar, I didn't really talk about cars. I should have, because cars are a big part of the problem, but they obviously have to be part of the solution. And so cars are not going to disappear, but we've got to electrify them. We've got to electrify all transport, basically. Again, after the webinar last time, I talked to a couple of people about electric ferries. I mean, they've got to be part of the solution as well. And, you know, there's innovative designs being developed for electric ferries. But in terms of the car fleet, it's just too slow. And, you know, one of the most depressing sights I saw as lockdown came out, I saw 2 car carriers going into Wellington, all had double cab utes on the back, and I didn't see a single, electric car being carted into Wellington. So, we still are addicted to those big double cab utes, helped by incentives through the fringe benefit tax that allows people to write those off. So I think the way, clearly at the moment, electric cars for most people are more expensive than getting an old dunger and keeping it going. But the fleet companies, and this includes the government should not buy another single fossil fuel car unless it's, a specialist car that they can't do it. They should be buying all their fleet as electric, because when they get rid of it, other people can buy it. And all companies should be doing that. So the fleet purchases are really important in electrifying the car fleet. There's a lot of other electrification that's needed in the transport sector. I mean, electric bikes are great. I use mine all the time, and I discovered today a wonderful use of hand sanitizer. When my chain fell off, I realized the alcohol in it actually could clean the grease off my hands. So that was a great new tip of recycling. And we've got to relook at the rebate system. That just got, I don't know whether Mike's right that it's the whole of government or whether it's just New Zealand first, but a lot of those really good policies get scuttled at the last moment. So we've got to look at that rebate scheme again. I've taken a particular interest in long distance trains. At the moment, we've got the Northern Explorer that's sitting idle. It's just not operating. They're going to start the one across to the West Coast shortly, but that's only going to be on weekends and holidays. Why is the Northern Explorer not trundling backwards and forwards between Auckland and Wellington now? And the answer really has to be that they directed that to tourists, high-paying tourists. I know Hannah's used it, I've used it, but you have to be wealthy to use it. And so I think the government now could get that going. It could possibly bring up the one that travels down to Christchurch. And so you could have a daily trip between Auckland and Wellington, and families would use it and make the prices domestic prices. So that's something I think they could do tomorrow. I've also had a big interest in long distance coaches. I mean, long distance coaches are certainly not the sexy form of travel, and a lot of people don't use them, but they actually link most New Zealand towns, and they link the New Zealand towns that the government is now subsidising the airlines to link. But we do have problems with our coaches. We don't have toilets on them, for example. And overseas, all long distance coaches have toilets on. And even in Australia, the legislation requires them to. So I think someone should bring a private member's bill, or preferably the government should do that as well, of putting the requirement for long distance buses to have toilets, and secondly, to have good stops with good toilets. Taupo is an example where people have to walk a couple of 100 metres to the toilets in the rain, and yet the Provincial Growth Fund has just put money into a new airport there. So, I took a case to the Human Rights Commission last year, complaining that those toilets discriminated against a range of people. It wasn't very successful, but I got a few people talking about it. So, yeah, long distance buses are important. And of course, my favourite, cycling. We've just got to encourage cycling and support cycling. And it's not just cycleways, the proper cycleways. We've got to have streets that are calm, where people can easily cycle and safely cycle. And what we find more and more, and this is a local authority thing more, is that we have to fight for crossings. We have to fight for, they take away one car park for a cycle lane, you have to fight for that. There's got to be a better system where local authorities can basically say, we are going to support cycling and this is going to happen. And we have to do this really big time. So yeah, there's tons we could do, and we could do a lot of it tomorrow, and we have to do it tomorrow because, I keep thinking that 2030, which is often a target used, we're halfway through this year. We haven't got that many years to 2030, and we've got to do a lot very quickly.
Thanks, Paul. All really good insights, and I can totally relate regarding the train situation. When you're trying to get from Auckland to Wellington, you want to do it in the best way possible, and walk the talk, and then you go and see the train ticket and it's $500 and it costs you $100 in gas to drive, and it's totally messed up. So I'd be a pretty big advocate of the Northern Explorer getting back up and running as well. Awesome. So we're gonna pass over to Mel now, and she's gonna unpack the action with Indigenous knowledge, and so such an important topic that needs to be interwoven within literally everything that we do and every decision we do. And yeah, I'll leave it over to you, Mel, because you can describe it a lot better than I can.
Some days I can, Shay, so some days I can't. And you're right, it is a topic, well, it's a whakaaro, it's a kaupapa that needs to be interwoven, and it is one that's quite often hard to discuss because people feel uncomfortable when we raise it. They don't often understand what we're talking about. It's something outside their understanding of the world, but also they don't always see the relevance of it. And I guess, I mean, I could talk about those frustrations and the issues of institutional racism and intergenerational trauma and the impacts that those have had on the inclusion or exclusion of Mātauranga Māori and Māori. And we could talk about the failings of our education system to teach New Zealand history and our treaty rights and interests, and the marginalisation of Māori, all things that many of us know that are very topical at the moment, that in parts there has been attempts to address, like a teaching of New Zealand history. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to be solution focused, and I guess talking about some actions and some ideas in a way addresses some of those issues. So what I would like to see is, as I said at the last webinar, I want to see a national conversation, a real one, on what we as New Zealanders and what we as Māori want from the recovery. What do we want our economic recovery to look like? Do we want a new education system? We've just all experienced online learning. Is that the way forward? Do we want 4-day working weeks? What is the agreement that we all, that we can all reach in terms of where we are heading? And that's important from a Māori perspective because we always think intergenerationally. We're always thinking about what is the outcome we want 100, 500 years from now. But as partners, as the Māori partner in this treaty relationship and as the tangata te tiriti partner, we need to be having that conversation together as we would if we were in a long-term relationship. If we were married, we would have a conversation about what is the shared vision we want for our relationship, for our whānau, for our children. What are the shared values and principles that we're committed to raising this family with? We haven't had a mature conversation like that in New Zealand between treaty partners about where it is we are going. What is our long-term vision for this country? And I think personally that unless we have that conversation and we start that as a treaty-based conversation between partners, we will never reach an outcome that is fair and equitable for everyone, because we'll be constantly going in different directions and or heading slightly in the same direction but going off path. I want to see a plan to get everyone there in an inclusive, united, joined up manner that brings everyone along on the journey. We need to start talking about intergenerational inequities, and we need to have plans that address that and bring the masses along. And for us, that means getting Māori up to speed and then joining along and coming on the journey. We need a plan that directs and guides agencies and guides investment, a plan that we can all support, we can all lobby for, we can all drive through action, through protest, as we're very good at, and we can all hand on heart say this is where we want to go. This is about participation. It's one of the core treaty obligations, allowing Māori to participate, ensuring Māori are able to participate in the response to protect our taonga as afforded to us under Article 2 of the treaty. I'd like to see that plan underpinned by Mātauranga Māori and respond to Māori aspirations. Aspirations because we have a right to be a partner and we have a right to having our needs met. We haven't had that in an equitable manner. Why Mātauranga Māori? Because it's a knowledge system that understands our environment. It's based on over 700 years of observational data of this place and this space. And it's also uniquely ours in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It gives us an edge. It helps us lead the world in conversations about best practice. From a Māori perspective, it is our obligation to other Indigenous communities to also fight for this. Selfishly, from a tangata whenua perspective, I only exist here in Aotearoa. Nowhere else am I tangata whenua. Without the whenua, I cease to exist. I am no longer Māori. We need to protect this land if we want to survive as Māori. And I want all of that underpinned and supported by longitudinal research that measures impact, not outcomes. I am fed up with measuring how many jobs we create, how many trees we plant, how many water samples we take. I want to measure impact. I want to understand that investment is driving change, behavioural change. It is seeing a difference in the way that we as humans are seeing ourselves, the way we feel. I want to see impact in that nexus between environmental and human health. And I want us to start to understand, because we do fundamentally at our core understand that nature is not only nice to have, but it's a have to have. We know that we have to have it for physical health and for cognitive function. And I think that we need to be measuring impact on physical health and cognitive function as well as impact on our environment. And I want to see a commitment, finally, to the next generation. I want to see a commitment to changing our education system so that people understand our history, they understand treaty rights and interests, they understand where Māori are coming from, our struggles. But I also want to see a commitment in this response to training the next generation. There are many, many people looking for jobs. There are many, many people who are unemployed. I know of a friend who was recruiting. She advertised for 2,000 positions and had 25,000 applicants during the lockdown. In that space, our rangatahi, our youth, aren't going to get jobs. They're not going to have the experience to lean on, and they're not going to be the favoured applicants. So I want to see a response that includes the next generation who we expect to pay for this response. So that's what I want to see. I also want to see people vote, of course. I love protests, so I'm quite happy to see people protest and to learn. One of the key things for lockdown for us was learning as a whānau. We read plenty of books. We watched webinars, we watched YouTube clips. I want to see us being committed to learning in the journey and carrying on. And hopefully that learning, that action, positive action, leads to good investment going forward for all of us.
Awesome, Mel, thank you. Some really, really awesome stuff in there, guys. And lastly, we're going to chat and he wrote the renewable energy section in the open letter. There were a couple of things that really stood out to me when you were kind of going over your context was just the 2 shovel-ready projects that you think are really bad. That would be really cool to sort of see exactly what they are. And just sort of any insight that you have from a personal perspective in Wellington regarding the elections as well, because I know you're all over that stuff too.
Cool, thanks everyone. It's been really interesting listening to the kōrero so far. I'll start with the election point because it's the real action that I wanted to highlight. This year is election year and we are less than 90 days out from the election. What happens in that election will have big impacts for New Zealand's renewable energy and climate policy long term. Our opposition party, National, has pledged to significantly amend the Zero Carbon Act. And to be fair, 6 of the 7 amendments they want to do are not significant. They are 5 of the 7 are already in the legislation. The 7th is changing the methane, or the 6th is changing the methane target, which is already being done by the Climate Commission now. And the last one, 7, which is a really problematic one, is removing reference to the 1.5 degree target and moving to a 2 degree target, which is undercutting the Paris Agreement that they signed. So what happens this election will mean a lot for the stability and certainty of our climate policy. I remember I was writing my dissertation in law on the emissions trading scheme back in 2008 to 2009, the summer that National got elected, and was elected on a pledge to repeal the emissions trading scheme. That even though they didn't pass any legislation to amend it, sorry, not to repeal, to fundamentally change, they pledged it. They didn't promise to, or they didn't actually pass any legislation for 9 months to do that. They said they'd put the market on hold and amend it. They didn't put the market on hold, but they crashed the market with what they said. We can't afford this kind of uncertainty around our climate policy. So this means we need to move national. We need to target national members of parliament and highlight that these issues are important to voters who want to vote for their party. I'm not one of those people. For social, other political, philosophical reasons, I will not support that party. But others on this call would want to vote for a conservative political party that takes climate change seriously. So go for it. Tell them that. We also need to be very mindful that, as Mike and others have alluded to, Labour is not necessarily our friend. The excuse that New Zealand First is holding up environmental policy is sometimes true. But we also have some people in Labour who are very, very, very close to the industries they're trying to regulate. We see that just today on a fisheries issue on marine protected area. Eugenie Sage recommending as Minister for Conservation an expansion of, I think it was Campbell Island. It's in marine protected area, being overruled by Stuart Nash as Minister for Fisheries. Nash has taken the side of the fishing industry time after time. We also, as was discussed momentarily in the chat before, risk losing the Green Party from Parliament. And it is important to have a voice for sustainability in Parliament. It is highly, highly unlikely that the Opportunities Party or the Sustainable New Zealand Party or any of those other polling on less than 0.5 or 1% parties would make it into Parliament. But there's a real risk that the Greens might drop below 5% and be out of Parliament. That would mean that those votes would be pro rata apportioned across all the other parties. They'd go to Labour and they'd go to National in the largest sum. So the biggest thing I want to urge everyone to do is get engaged with campaigning this election. Learn from the examples of environmental campaigners overseas, especially in the UK and the US, where they have really aggressively targeted members of Parliament or Congress, candidates for Congress, candidates for Senate in past elections. One example is a common tactic that is used heavily in the US, but is very rare in New Zealand, is a thing called bird dogging, where basically you go to opposing candidates or possibly sympathetic but not persuaded candidates' rallies, and you make sure you're the first person in the queue. You're the first person to try to shake their hand at the end. You're the first person to get in their face. And you ask them with one of your friends holding their camera up, holding their phone up, videoing you, to pledge to take no money from fossil fuel industries, to shut down dirty dairy, to recommit to the 100% renewable electricity target, whatever it is. Get them on video, target them at their events. A lot of candidates in New Zealand are not used to that. Email actions are powerful, but phone actions, in-person actions, much more powerful. We learned that in the Zero Carbon Act campaign, but we'll reconfirmed what we said. There are two, I need to double check the question you asked about the shovel-ready projects. There were two roading projects that concerned me and that I've seen others in the climate sector be concerned about, but I can't remember the details off the top of my head. So I can double check that. But the real thing I wanted to highlight was the opportunity for systemic change there. There are two other points I want to make around campaigning this election. The first is being really careful about when you punch up and when you punch down. And I have some real reservations, though eliminating waste is critically important around campaigning, for example, against plastic straws, because of how critical they are for some people with disabilities. And so it's being sensitive to how your asks are impacting other people and communities you interact with. The final point I wanted to highlight is this tension between individual action and mass political action. We know that to solve the climate crisis, we need transformative systemic scale, change at scale. We can't do that just by individual action. And there is some really concerning overseas research that suggests that in the US in particular, places that have had public campaigns to change your light bulb, for example, to low energy light bulbs, have lower rates of support for prices on carbon. Because people are like, oh, I've changed my light bulbs. That means I've solved climate change. I don't need to worry about things. It doesn't. So if we are making these asks for individual action, or if we're taking individual action, which I absolutely encourage, that must not be at the expense of collective political action to change the unjust, unsustainable political systems we live in. And one of the questions in the chat was around vegetarian and vegan diets. I've been vegan for 17 or something years, wherever possible, sometimes not when I'm overseas traveling for work. But you know, it's very hard to be vegan in Kiribati, for example. But those are ways you can change your own lifestyle to lead by example and to lower your own personal impact. But they should not come at the expense of structural political action, because that systemic change is what we need in order to solve this crisis. I'll answer the question Shay raised about the shovel-ready projects in the chat, but over to the next speaker.
Thanks, David, really good. And definitely that kind of cohesive joining of the grassroots movement and merging that into actual systemic change at the business and government level is super important. And, you know, the individual change and then the businesses that all co-signed this open letter all have a really big role to play. So yeah, watch this space for a few ideas that I have to kind of get those little bits rolling and kind of like joining and making links there. And there's just one point to bring up, and there's a lot of people working on this around the country in different spaces and different groups as well. So never feel like you're alone, or never feel like your actions aren't needed or wanted or are too small, because if we all stop caring, then yeah, we're facing a pretty dire sort of future. So keep it positive, guys, and make sure you keep all of those actions rolling. And we're running a little low on time, so we're just going to wrap everything up in the next few minutes. But this final topic, final section, is just on keeping it positive and keeping those actions rolling. And we're just going to go through each panelist really quickly, 1 minute each, and it's what is the tip that you give to individuals? What's the tip that you give to businesses or people within business trying to make change? And if you could speak to government, what's the one thing you could say? So just really fast, we'll go through speaker by speaker, and then we'll wrap things up, guys. So first up, yeah, how about we start with Mike? What are your one business, one individual, and one government?
Individual, don't give up. Just keep on fighting and make more noise than you are at the moment. And for businesses, don't go back to normal. You know, think about how you can do it differently. You know, normal was ecocide, and you know, not for all businesses, but for a lot of them. So we need to rethink that, and that goes for everyone. And for government, just stop listening to lobby groups and listen to us. That's all. Nice.
Mel, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I can't really, because Mike just stole everything I was going to say. Oh yeah, I wouldn't say much different. I'd say to individuals, learn and reach out. You know, be aware of where you are and the places you live, and you know, and yeah, read a book, learn some history, watch a YouTube clip. People in business communities, I completely agree with Mike. Don't go back to business as usual, please. You know, take some learnings from this and see what we can do differently going forward. And exactly the same for government. We need diversity of thought, diversity of opinions in government. So please listen to other voices other than the lobby groups.
Thanks, David. You're up next.
So message to individuals is, I think, very much what others have already said. Don't be disheartened. Small groups of people can change things on a huge level. It's, as the Margaret Mead quote says, that's the only thing that ever has. But also, don't waste your time talking to the people who'll never be persuaded. Don't talk about this to your racist uncle who sends you YouTube videos about how it's all a lie and chemtrails are causing climate change. It's not worth it. Don't waste your time there. Find the people who can be persuaded. Focus your time there. To businesses, your customers, your clients want action. Your clients, especially with the generational shift happening every year. Your clients want you to and will respond if you speak up. None of the businesses that signed on to the open letters for the Zero Carbon Act reported any harm to their business from signing that, from publicly supporting a zero carbon target. And I've heard nothing from Shay or anyone else in this open letter to suggest any business has suffered from speaking out. Your customers want this. Finally, to government, there's no point raising political capital if you never spend it to do transformative, important, good things. Act, use the capital you have. Don't just try to get higher and higher in the polls for no reason.
Awesome. Hannah.
Yes, I completely tautoko everything that everyone's already said, and I'll just contribute from a waste perspective to say that waste is really a symptom of a broken system. So when we talk about tackling waste, we're wanting to look at systemic changes and things that are going to make a change on that level. So zero waste is a non-consumerist philosophy. So the best waste reduction is in the things you don't buy rather than the things you do buy. So every time you go to get a thing, whether for your home, for your workplace, for your business, for New Zealand, ask yourself, do I really need this? Do we nearly need this? Can I get it another way other than new, and so on. Zero waste is also about sourcing your essentials locally and supporting the little guys. Zero waste is about living it and doing it. So give Plastic Free July a go as an individual, as a business. Let's have Coca-Cola try Plastic Free July, as a policymaker, as a politician. But remember that the problem is bigger than plastic. Zero waste is about reuse rather than single use. How can you become a reuser rather than a chucker, and encourage others to be reusers rather than chuckers too, in your home, through your business, through government, policy. And finally, we'll never be a zero waste society for as long as organic material is going to landfill. So let's get food scraps out of rubbish bins through household and community-based solutions that allow us to regenerate our soil and grow kai, because after all, it's not waste, it's a resource.
Thanks, Hannah. And lastly, Paul.
Oh, well, for individuals, buy a bike and use it. Take your hand sanitizer with you just in case your chain falls off. So that would be good. For businesses, I just think there's, for transport, probably the biggest thing they could do at the moment is to stay with a lot of the Zoom working at home. I mean, that would have a transformational effect on commuting and car use. And for government, in the transport area, we actually know what the solutions are. They're not rocket science. They know what the solutions are, and they've got to start doing them. And the first one is just do not build any more roads. Fix the roads that are dangerous, but don't build any more motorways.
Amazing, guys. Just before we wrap up, I'm going to launch a quick poll. So you'll see 2 questions come up on your screen now, and we'll just leave that open for about 30 seconds, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. So if you could just quickly take a moment to participate. And in the meantime, I'd just like it to say a massive thank you. Sorry, we went over by about 10 minutes, but I hope it's worth it for you guys. Some really, really good things came out of that, and a massive thank you again to the panelists for all of your effort and your time. It's so appreciated. And thank you to all the attendees, either here live or on the recording. You guys are legends, keep it up. Thank you for engaging. Thanks for your effort. I'm just going to end that poll there. I'll share the results with you guys. No secrets around here. Cool, so 64% found the information in this webinar useful and educational. 32% found it number 4, so just below that. And then heaps of you guys are onto actions right away, so super stoked with that. I challenge you all to go out and after this, just at least action one thing. I've put many links in the chats, even a petition sign can be one of those things. You'll all be sent the recording link to this webinar so that you can refer back to it or share it as you want. There will be a password, so just make sure you get the link and the password. I'll continue to keep everybody updated about progress from the open letter. Hopefully we hear back from Minister Shaw personally pretty soon, and we're definitely following up everybody at local government level as well. Yeah, so just massive thank you, huge gratitude to everybody here for showing up, for being those leaders in the New Zealand community, and just pushing everything forward. It's really needed, and yes, so appreciated. And we're going to end with a karakia from Mel. So thank you, everybody.
Kia ora, ngā mihi to you, Shay, for organising it and for inviting us all along. Acknowledgement of you. He karakia whakakapi kaupapa. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tātou riki o hiukaraiti. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhina tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amine.